Lore of League of Legends, The Weakest Heart, Chapter 7. The boundary markets and the assemblage hall were always steeped in shadows, overwhelmed by so much progress towering above them. But it had truly become night by the time we reached the payhouse nearest Clan Arvino. After some proper encouragement, the innkeeper became quite generous with his detailed ledger, although his handwriting left much to be desired. Nadiri was either somewhere in the basement or on the third floor. I left Aviat to the cellars, while a grapple line gave me access to an open window on the third floor. The small forge at the back of the room had burned down to embers, smouldering under a crust of ash. I crouched through the window and stepped inside. The room was dim, with only a single lamp lighting a small desk, but it was the man asleep at the desk that caught my breath. The curls of his dark hair and the desert-tanned skin, the vibration of my hex crystal stuttered. Perhaps he, too, had stalled time for himself. "Hakim?" I called out softly. The shape at the desk moved, waking slowly from sleep. He stretched with the grace of a cat and turned. The young man wiped the sleep from his eyes in disbelief. He was so much like Hakim, it hurt, but it was not him. "Mistress Feros." He shook himself more awake. What are you doing here?" "Have we met?" I asked. "No, not exactly, milady," he said, almost embarrassed, "but I have seen your face often." He went back to his desk and shuffled some papers, pulling out one that was slightly older and more worn than the others. He handed it to me. The lines were strong, the inkwork neat and orderly, and the shading precise. It was Hakim's work, but it was no diagram. Instead, it was a drawing of my face. I couldn't recall posing for it. He must have sketched it from memory after working in the lab one night. My hair was down. I was smiling. I was a woman in love. The sting was so sharp I couldn't help but take a breath. I didn't say anything to the young man in front of me now. I couldn't. "It could have been drawn yesterday, milady," he said, filling the silence. He meant it as a compliment, but it just magnified the acres of time that stretched on in my mind. "My uncle carried this with him until he passed." "Your uncle? He's dead?" "Yes, Hakim Nadiri. Do you remember him?" he asked. "Yes." The word stuck in my mouth and wrapped itself around a selfish question I had carried for far too long. One I was never sure if I wanted an answer to. If the pain of memory was to overwhelm me with 1,000 little cuts, better to open them all at once and be done with it. I looked at the young man who looked too much like Hakim. "Tell me, did your uncle ever marry?" "No, milady," he said, unsure if he was going to disappoint me. "Uncle Hakim said that to love your work was more than we could ask for in life." I had wept all my tears long ago, and so there were none left to come to me now. I picked up the stack of papers and set the drawing of my face on top. The lines of ink wavered in the blue light of the machine that replaced my heart. What I was, what I gave up, all the sharp-toothed sacrifice that made me who I am today, all of it was rendered in painstaking detail. I could hold the past, but never have it again. "This is all of it? All of the work?" My words came out a dark whisper. "Yes, milady, but—" His voice trailed off in disbelieving horror as I set the bundle on the bank coals and blew gently. The oiled parchment ignited and quickly burned a red-orange. I watched the past bubble and darken until nothing but cinders and dust was left. It was the young man that pulled me back to the present. Hakim's nephew shook his head slowly, his disbelief palpable. I understood how the shock of losing so much so quickly could be overwhelming. He was numb. I escorted him down the stairs to the street below. He adjusted the leather satchel on his shoulder and stared at the cobbles. He looked back at me. The air of defeat was replaced by one of growing fear. Having been so lost in my own past, I took less notice of the shadows on the street. I barely heard the metallic jangle of wire. The lash of the whip came fast, binding my arms to my side. "That's far enough, milady," Aviat said. Her voice was smug. I watched her look Hakim's nephew over. "Is this what my brother paid you for?" I had suspected as much. Aviat had been watching for an opportunity all evening. My distraction at finding Hakim's nephew seemed as good an opportunity as any. Yes, she said. All of us. Two big men stepped onto the cobbles, their repaired augmentations catching the streetlight. The chubby one and his little rat-faced counterpart followed behind. They were the same men from the alley behind the assemblage hall. The chubby one shoved a knife at Hakim's nephew while the other smiled his rodent smile and bound and gagged the young apprentice. The juggernaut with the newly connected chem tube stepped forward. His fingers twitched, eager to return the violence I had visited on him earlier. "Mind the crystals, MF," Aviat said. The whip tightened and I felt metal cuffs close around my wrists. She walked around to stand next to Hakim's nephew. "We're to collect them and Nadiri, or no one gets paid." Was all of this for my brother's jealousy? I knew Stefan felt the tide of years slipping away and saw me standing near immortal in all of it, but he truly had no idea the cost of my duty to the family. Could he not see what it would cost him now? "And the rest?" the copper man asked, smiling at me as if we were about to tuck into a Progress Day feast. "All yours," replied Aviat. "It was nice of you, Your Grace, to demonstrate your talents earlier," he said as he pulled his augmented arm back into a fist. He obviously felt no need to hide the telegraph when facing a bound opponent. His grin widened. "It will make this go so much quicker." The metal knuckles connected with my jaw. He expected me to fight it, but instead I looked the punch take me down to a knee. The inertia forced his heavily augmented arm to come down to the ground with me. I tasted my own blood on my lips, but it was he who was off balance for the moment. The rest of the gang's prattle went silent. "You haven't seen all my tricks," I said as I stood. The energy of my hex crystals coursed through me, the power building up like a wall. The Juggernaut's brother attempted to step in, bringing his own augmented fist down on the glowing buffer. The shield popped and hissed, but held. It was my turn to smile. Aviat grabbed the trailing handle of the wire whip, hoping to shake me free of the energy field. She yanked hard to pull me off balance. She had no idea how long I'd lived my life on a knife's edge. My hands still bound, I leapt forward into a spinning kick, slitting the throat of the second Juggernaut and coming down to impale the first. The tail of the whip snaked out of Aviat's hand. She called to the two who still held Hakim's nephew. "Abandon the job and I'll kill you both." "Do you still think I have a heart now?" I asked her, the two Goliaths lying dead at my feet. Aviat was unsure, but stood her ground. "I am the sword and shield of Clan Feros," I told her, ice enunciating every word. "My brother seeks to kill me to extend his brittle life for a few more selfish moments. His desires have betrayed his duty and our house." I felt the crystals pulse faster. "And you will not live enough to see the morning," I said. I channeled the crystal's energy for a moment, building its intensity until the shield that had once surrounded me became an electrified prison. There would be no escape. I leapt into the air higher than before and came down hard, shattering the metal that bound my wrists and the cobbles between us. The force of the impact knocked over Aviat, her two remaining thugs, and Nadiri's nephew. The streets had ruptured in a crater and dust hung in the air. The fight Aviat had been looking for since we'd met to prove herself to my brother was not going as planned. The heels of her leather boots scuffed to the stone of the street, her body announcing her retreat before even her mind had fully agreed to it. I read her fear as she stood facing me. Whatever my brother had told her of me, she had sorely underestimated. Aviat saw that any trace of the mercy I carried before had been boiled away by the full revelation of my brother's betrayal. I stepped forward and let my back leg arc around. I leaned into the blade as it connected. Aviat struggled to keep what was in her belly from spilling out, but it was a futile effort. I made short work of her two last goons, and the alley behind the payhouse was quiet again. I picked up Aviat's blood-soaked whip from the street. The nephew of Hakim Nadiri had backed himself against the wall in his panic. The young man's breath was coming in panting waves through the dirty cloth that gagged him. I approached him as you would an animal you didn't wish to startle. I untied the bindings at his wrist. I offered him my hand and his fingers trembled at my touch. As soon as he was set upon his feet, he let go. He had seen the violent face of my duty, what I could never bring myself to show Hakim, and I had let it happen. The soft-hearted woman I once was had truly been burned away, leaving only a cold darkness and grey ash. The tests, he said, his chin quivering with a different kind of terror. The reality of the evening was coming to bear as he realised none of this was a dream. What am I to show the artificers tomorrow? You studied under your uncle? Yes, he taught me everything but the designs. Hakim's nephew knew his options, either come to work for me or give up his life's work. My position as intelligencer would not allow the knowledge he possessed to fall to another house. In his frightened eyes, I saw his innocence of the world sacrificed. I was a murderous saviour and a dark protector. In this moment of cruel understanding, I had become his grey lady, a steel shadow to be feared and venerated. You will build them better tomorrow, I said. Unable to process his thoughts into words, he nodded his head and stumbled into the night. I prayed he would rebuild his resolve before the dawn. Otherwise, there would be nowhere to run that I could not catch him.